A wealthy man's handicapped child nearly perished in their swimming pool, and only the housekeeping staff's African-American son leaped in to rescue her. However, the consequences following his brave deed transformed everything permanently. The splash of Thiago Santos plunging into the pristine waters of the Whitmore Estates pool resonated like a rifle shot through the heavy stillness of that weekend evening. While 40 privileged spectators observed in horror, the teenager sliced through the liquid with frantic resolve toward Isabella's motionless form, which was gradually descending in her aquatic wheelchair. "Somebody must act," one woman had cried out, yet her luxury footwear stayed firmly rooted on the imported stone encircling the swimming area. Thiago acted without hesitation. As the child of Dona Carmen, the housekeeper who had maintained that residence for over a decade, he was familiar with every section of the estate and understood that Isabella, despite being 15, suffered from cerebral palsy and lacked the ability to rescue herself. Her specialized gear had malfunctioned, and terror had consumed her expression as she battled against the liquid. Within moments that felt endless, Thiago reached the young woman, released her from the sunken seat, and lifted her to the surface. Her respiration resumed in frantic inhalations as he transported her to the poolside, where assistance finally extended to help. "I'm grateful," Isabella gasped between coughing fits, gripping her rescuer's limb with sincere appreciation. That's when Richard Whitmore emerged, shoving through the crowd of visitors. His expression burned with fury, though not due to the crisis that had nearly claimed his child's existence. "What in blazes are you doing in the guest area?" he bellowed at Thiago, who remained soaked beside the pool. "Didn't your parent instruct you to remain in your designated space?" The youth gazed at the wealthy man with unsettling composure. At 17, Thiago had already understood that individuals like Richard Whitmore viewed people like him solely as dangers to their flawless existence, even when they preserved lives. "Father, he rescued me," Isabella attempted to defend him, but was swiftly quieted. "Be silent, Isabella. You shouldn't have been using that faulty apparatus." Richard faced Thiago once more. "And you, child, you'll rue the day you stepped where you weren't welcome." As Thiago observed the situation develop, something in his gaze revealed this wasn't merely another adolescent frightened of power. There existed a tranquility there that only emerges in those who have encountered far worse tempests and understood precisely how to endure them. If this tale of bias and unfairness moved you, remember to follow the channel because what occurred subsequently demonstrated that undervaluing someone's intellect can be life's greatest error. During the 2 days after the rescue, the Whitmore estate became a genuine social war zone. Richard had terminated Dona Carmen that very day, alleging security violation for permitting her child to access forbidden zones. The irony was exquisite, punishing the mother of the champion who rescued his own child. "You have 1 day to vacate the employee housing," Richard had announced to Carmen over the telephone, his tone as frigid as winter ice. "And ensure that troublemaker never enters this estate again. I'm showing mercy by not pursuing legal action for trespassing." Isabella had attempted to advocate for her friend's family, but each effort led to her father escalating the consequences. Initially, he seized her mobile device. Next, he prohibited her adapted swimming instruction, the precise activity that provided her greatest autonomy. Ultimately, he employed a private caregiver to monitor her constantly, converting her residence into a luxurious jail. "You fail to comprehend, darling," Richard rationalized with that artificial tolerance wealthy individuals employ when attempting to appear logical. "Individuals like them form emotional connections to exploit us. That youth rescued you for compensation, not from compassion." However, Isabella had been acquainted with Thiago for years. She recalled the evenings when he assisted her with assignments while her mother worked, the volumes he obtained from the community library for their shared reading, the humor he shared to brighten her challenging physiotherapy sessions. Richard would never grasp that some people in existence are driven by something beyond monetary gain. Meanwhile, in the humble rental dwelling where they currently resided, Thiago exhibited a calmness that would fascinate any mental health professional. At 17, he had cultivated a remarkable capacity to convert every unfairness into motivation for something superior. "Mother, don't be concerned," he stated peacefully, arranging his academic materials on the dining surface. "We'll manage fine." Carmen observed her child with combined pride and worry. Since childhood, Thiago had been unique. While other youngsters wept for costly playthings, he dismantled damaged electronic gadgets to comprehend their function. When peers grumbled about challenging instructors, he acquired books to learn beyond the syllabus. And when he encountered discrimination at school, he responded by achieving the highest marks in his grade. "Child, I understand you're intelligent, but Richard Whitmore possesses influence and wealth. Individuals like him ruin lives on impulse, Carmen cautioned, her hands still trembling from the shame of being escorted from the mansion by security personnel. Thiago grinned. Not the resentful expression of someone accepting failure, but something far more dangerous. It was the expression of someone who had just received precisely the inspiration he required. Mother, do you recall the tale you frequently shared about grandfather? How he constructed our initial home stone by stone, despite everyone claiming an African-American man would never possess land in that area. Carmen nodded, uncertain where her child was heading with this. He didn't construct that dwelling to demonstrate his correctness. He built it to prove their error. Thiago activated his computer, an aged model he had fixed personally, and started typing. Richard Whitmore believes he understands me. He assumes I'm merely another frightened youth from the housing projects. On the display, a website started forming. Thiago had learned programming at 13 after acquiring a damaged computer from a scrapyard. His digits moved across the keys with a musician's accuracy performing a masterpiece. What are you creating? Carmen inquired. Investigation, came the reply. The response was straightforward, yet something in Thiago's manner made his mother understand she was observing the emergence of something far greater than a simple teenage response. During the following days, while Richard celebrated his triumph over the Santos household, Thiago dove into a realm of accessible information. Corporate records, political contributions, legal proceedings, governmental contracts, everything was available, awaiting someone intelligent enough to make connections. And Santiago Santos, child of a cleaning woman, without a father, residing on the city's outskirts, was preparing to provide the powerful Richard Whitmore with an education he would never forget. Never undervalue the intellect of someone who possesses everything to achieve and nothing to forfeit. Each fresh finding made his eyes sparkle with an intensity his mother recognized yet also feared. It was the identical gleam he displayed when dismantling electronic equipment, the pure delight of someone who had just understood precisely how components connected. 7 days following his humiliating termination, Thiago had converted the kitchen surface into a genuine command headquarters. 3 aged computers he had retrieved from a junkyard operated simultaneously, their displays illuminated during the pre-dawn hours as he explored public databases, corporate files, and social platforms with a veteran investigator's accuracy. Child, it's 3 in the morning, Carmen whispered, entering the kitchen wearing her nightgown. You require rest. 15 additional minutes, Mother, Thiago responded without glancing away from the displays. I'm nearly finished with a crucial section. What Carmen didn't realize was that her child had uncovered something intriguing about Richard Whitmore. The individual who portrayed himself as an honorable property developer possessed a background of silenced employment lawsuits, questionable governmental agreements, and a system of shell corporations that would excite any federal attorney. At his educational institution, Thiago discovered the ideal partner in someone unexpected. Professor Janet Morrison, a former investigative reporter who had become an educator after revealing a political controversy that nearly ended her profession. She noticed when Thiago started posing complex questions about business law and journalistic principles during lessons. You're researching someone, correct? She asked after class, her expertise immediately recognizing the indicators. Thiago paused, but something in the instructor's attitude earned his confidence. Yes? The individual who unjustly dismissed my mother. Janet smiled, not with sympathy, but with professional regard. Show me your findings. When Thiago displayed his initial discoveries, Janet was amazed. In 7 days, the young individual had gathered information that would require an experienced journalist months to collect. You possess a natural gift for this, she acknowledged. However, you need legal guidance to avoid errors that could damage the case. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore continued his cruelty campaign with the arrogance characteristic of someone who had never faced genuine consequences. He had employed a security company to observe the Santos family, convinced they would attempt retaliation in some primitive manner. Individuals like them are predictable, he remarked during a phone conversation with his attorney. They'll likely attempt to file for wrongful termination or generate some social media controversy, nothing that several $1,000s in legal expenses won't resolve. What Richard didn't understand was that his own surveillance cameras had recorded his most damaging discussions. Thiago had discovered that the mansion's monitoring system contained a significant weakness. Richard had personally demanded remote access through his cellular device, establishing a vulnerability that a capable programmer could manipulate. Isabella, restricted to her gilded cage, discovered an innovative method to contact the outside world. Her caregiver, a sympathetic woman named Rosa, couldn't overlook the obvious unfairness of the circumstances and secretly permitted the girl to use her personal device. "I must speak with Thiago," Isabella had pleaded. "Just 5 minutes, please." When they finally communicated, Isabella supplied essential information that even Thiago's digital investigations had missed. "My father maintains a hidden office in the cellar," she whispered into the device. "I hear him conversing there nightly with individuals I've never encountered. And there's a vault behind my grandfather's portrait." Thiago absorbed every detail, his tactical mind linking this information with everything he had already uncovered. The puzzle was assembling, and the complete image would be catastrophic for Richard Whitmore. Professor Janet had connected Thiago with Marcus Chun, a civil rights attorney who handled pro bono cases involving social unfairness. Marcus was intrigued not only by the evidence the young man had assembled but by the sophistication of his method. "You're 17 years old, and you're already constructing superior cases to some attorneys," Marcus noted during their initial meeting. "However, we must exercise caution. Individuals like Whitmore possess resources to devastate entire lives if they feel threatened." "Professor Chun," Thiago replied with that unsettling serenity his mother recognized, "they can only devastate what you permit them to observe. And I've been extremely careful about what I allow them to see." Over the subsequent 2 weeks, while Richard celebrated his supposed victory over the troubled family, Thiago labored 18 hours daily perfecting his strategy. Every insult, every arrogance display, every cruel act Richard committed was carefully recorded and archived. Carmen watched her son's metamorphosis with combined pride and concern. The youth, who had always been mature beyond his years, now displayed strategic depth that was almost intimidating. His sleepless nights were devoted not to entertainment or social media, but to constructing something she didn't yet completely comprehend. "Mother," Thiago said one morning, shutting the final laptop and stretching after another early work session. "You remember that story about grandfather constructing our initial house stone by stone?" "Certainly, child. He didn't merely prove his correctness. He built something that endured for generations." Thiago smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Carmen recognized her son's genuine expression. "Richard Whitmore believes he understands me. He assumes I'm merely another angry young individual who will surrender when the anger subsides." Carmen felt a chill travel down her spine, not from fear, but from anticipation. "What he doesn't realize is that I'm not merely constructing revenge. I'm building a legacy." Thiago opened a computer file, revealing months of careful work. "And when I'm finished, the entire community will understand precisely who Richard Whitmore is." At that moment, with morning illumination highlighting her son's determined expression, Carmen realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Beneath Richard Whitmore's cruel arrogance, an unstoppable power had emerged, driven not by anger, but by a relentless justice pursuit that would permanently alter everyone involved. Monday morning started ordinarily for Richard Whitmore until his phone erupted with 53 missed communications before 8 o'clock. His assistant was frantic. Journalists surrounded the Whitmore holding structure, and his spouse had secured their mansion doors, refusing contact with anyone. "What's happening?" Richard shouted at his attorney, Harrison Wells, who entered his office with a ghostly pale complexion. "Richard, we must discuss immediately." Wells sealed the door and activated soundproofing, a procedure reserved only for the most devastating crises. Someone revealed everything. And when I say everything, I mean absolutely everything. On the computer display, Wells opened numerous web pages simultaneously. The Herald Tribune announced, property magnate utilized shell corporations for money laundering. The Financial Times had published, fraudulent government agreements generated millions for Whitmore. However, it was the Washington Post headline that made Richard collapse in his seat. Secret recordings expose plans to eliminate witnesses. "That's impossible," Richard whispered, his hands trembling as he scrolled through the articles. "No one had access to that information. My office is secure. My phones are encrypted." Wells interrupted, indicating a specific article section. "They don't merely possess documents. They have audio recordings of your discussions in your secret basement office. Conversations where you detail how to resolve the Santos problem after they interfere where they shouldn't." Richard's blood chilled. Those conversations had occurred in his most private sanctuary, the office that even his wife didn't know existed. Who could have accomplished this? The answer arrived as an email addressed exclusively to Richard from an address he immediately recognized, investigateko.whitmore@gmail.com. The sender had simply signed T.S. "Mr. Whitmore, over the past 6 weeks, I have systematically recorded your criminal activities through public sources, recordings obtained legally via security vulnerabilities in your own systems, and testimony from people you have gravely underestimated. Your shell corporations, documented. Your fraudulent agreements, exposed. Your threats against my family, recorded. Your deliberate neglect toward Isabella, filmed. You claimed people like me are predictable. You were correct. I predicted precisely how you would respond when your arrogance was publicly revealed. The distinction between us is simple. You employ your power to destroy innocent lives. I use my intelligence to protect those I cherish and expose those who harm others. P.S. The federal authorities have already received copies of everything. Your accounts were frozen 20 minutes ago. Sincerely, Thiago Santos, the youth you underestimated. Richard read the email 3 times, his mind refusing to accept reality. A 17-year-old teenager had destroyed an empire built over decades. This cannot be occurring, he muttered, his hands perspiring as he attempted to access his online bank accounts. Access denied. All of them. Richard, there's more, Wells said, his voice barely audible. They possess a video of you threatening the Santos family on the day you dismissed them. Someone concealed a camera in your office during the conversation. Actually, there was no hidden camera. Isabella, using Rosa's phone, had recorded the entire conversation through an open call that Thiago had secretly received. But Richard didn't need to know those technical details. Richard's phone rang. It was the FBI. Mr. Whitmore, this is Special Agent Victoria Torres. We have a search and seizure warrant for your properties and offices. We request your immediate presence at our office to clarify the charges of money laundering, tax fraud, and witness intimidation. As Richard attempted to formulate a response, Wells whispered urgently, they're already at the mansion. Isabella is being interviewed by social services about parental neglect and a toxic home environment. The irony was delicious. Richard had spent weeks boasting about how he had put that family in its place, never imagining that every act of cruelty was being meticulously documented and converted into evidence against him. Across town, Thiago watched the news in the small apartment he now shared with his mother. Carmen was crying, not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride in the son who had transformed brutal injustice into a lesson in dignity and intelligence. Son, how did you accomplish this? She asked, still in disbelief. Mother, you taught me that education is the one thing no one can remove from you. Richard Whitmore forgot that intelligence has no color, social class, or address. He underestimated me because he saw only an African-American child from the projects. He didn't see a self-taught programmer, a natural strategist, someone who has learned to convert every obstacle into fuel for something greater. Professor Janet called, ecstatic. Thiago, 3 universities have already called offering full scholarships after they heard about your investigative work. Harvard, MIT, and Stanford want to speak with you this week. Marcus Chun, the attorney, arrived an hour later with official documents. Isabella's family has filed a request for you to be named her educational guardian while she is under state protection. She specifically asked to continue studying with you. At that moment, as sirens echoed through the city toward Whitmore's properties, Thiago smiled with the serenity of someone who had proven a fundamental point. True strength doesn't originate from money or inherited power, but from the ability to transform injustice into opportunity, humiliation into fuel, and contempt into absolute determination. Richard Whitmore had attempted to destroy a family out of pure prejudice and arrogance. In response, he received a masterclass on how intelligence, when combined with righteous purpose, can bring down entire empires built on rotten foundations. The real estate mogul, who had awakened that morning believing he controlled destinies, now faced the reality that his own destiny had been sealed by a young man he had dismissed as just another troubled kid. The crucial difference was that Thiago Santos had never underestimated anyone, especially not the destructive power of blind arrogance in men who confuse privilege with superiority. 6 months after Richard Whitmore's spectacular fall, the transformation in Thiago Santos' life seemed like something from a film, but it was absolutely real. The young man who had been humiliated and expelled from a mansion now walked the corridors of Harvard University with a full scholarship in computer science and digital law, a double degree created especially for him after 3 universities competed for his enrollment. Mother, look at this, said Thiago, showing his cell phone to Carmen as they had lunch in the university cafeteria. The Boston Herald headline read, Former tycoon Richard Whitmore sentenced to 15 years in prison for money laundering and witness intimidation. Carmen smiled, but her pride went far beyond the downfall of the man who had tried to destroy her family. Son, do you remember when you were 8 years old and took apart that old radio I brought home from work? Sure. You got mad because you thought I broke it. I was angry because I didn't understand that you were trying to understand how things worked inside. Today, I realized that I always knew you saw what others couldn't see. Thiago's story had become a national phenomenon. 3 documentaries, dozens of interviews, and a book in development told how a teenager from the slums had brought down an empire built on prejudice and corruption using only intelligence, determination, and an internet connection. Universities began teaching the Santos case in ethics, investigative journalism, and social justice classes. Isabella, now under the guardianship of a carefully selected adoptive family, continued her study sessions with Thiago via video chat. At 16, she had become an eloquent activist for the rights of people with disabilities, using her own experience to expose how prejudice can exist even within the most privileged families. Thiago taught me that being underestimated can be our greatest advantage, she said during a speech at her school. While people are busy putting you down, you can be building something they never expected. On the other side of the country, Richard Whitmore was serving his sentence at the federal penitentiary in Danbury. His bank accounts were confiscated, his mansions auctioned off to pay damages, and his reputation completely destroyed. Former elite friends avoided mentioning his name, and his own wife had divorced him before the trial was even over, claiming she had been misled for years about the character of the man she married. In a letter that was never sent, found by guards during a routine search, Richard had written, "I completely underestimated that boy. I thought that power and money were enough to crush anyone who dared to challenge me. I never imagined that he had the intelligence and patience to build my own destruction brick by brick, using my arrogance as fuel." The irony was perfect. The man who had spent his life belittling people for their color or social class now shared a cell with exactly the kind of people he had always despised. And unlike him, they treated him with a basic human dignity he had never offered anyone. Marcus Chun, the lawyer who had mentored Thiago, now ran the Santos Chun Institute for Digital Justice, funded by donations that poured in from across the country after the story went viral. Thiago proved that in today's digital world, the truth can travel faster than lies, and justice can be more effective than revenge, Chun explained in interviews. Professor Janet Morrison, who had been the first to recognize Thiago's investigative potential, now taught a course called Citizen Journalism and Social Responsibility at the same school where it had all begun. "My students learned that each of us can be an agent of change," she said proudly. Thiago proved that age, background, or financial resources do not determine your ability to make a difference. 3 years later, during his magna cum laude graduation from Harvard, Thiago was invited to be the class speaker. In front of thousands of people, including his mother in the front row, he shared the lesson he had learned on that fateful day at the Whitmore's pool. "When Richard Whitmore looked at me with contempt and told me I didn't know my place, he was right in a way he never imagined. I didn't really know my place because my place wasn't determined by the address where I was born, the color of my skin, or my mother's profession. My place was determined by my ability to turn injustice into fuel for something greater. True revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so extraordinary that they realize they wasted an opportunity to have you on their side. It's proving that your greatness never depended on their approval." The audience rose to a standing ovation that lasted a full 5 minutes. Among those present were dozens of young people from humble backgrounds who had been inspired by Thiago's story to pursue their own impossible dreams. Carmen, at 62, now ran her own cleaning company, employing other women from the community with fair wages and full benefits. "My son taught me that we should never accept what others say we are," she said. "We are the ones who decide that." The story that began with a heroic dive into a swimming pool had turned into waves of change that swept across the country. Schools began teaching about unconscious bias, companies revised their hiring policies, and thousands of young people discovered they had the power to challenge unjust systems. Richard Whitmore had tried to teach Thiago Santos his place in society. In response, Thiago had taught the whole world that no place is too small for someone with enough greatness to turn injustice into opportunity. The final lesson was crystal clear: arrogance destroys those who practice it. But intelligence combined with a just purpose builds legacies that last for generations. Thiago had not only defeated Richard Whitmore, he had proven that true power never lies in bank accounts or property titles, but in the ability to see potential where others see only prejudice. And if you also believe that the best revenge is the success your enemies could never imagine, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that justice, when served with intelligence, always finds its way.